Welcome to Points of View, a discussion of issues regarding persons with disabilities, moderated by Doug Uziak.
Today's panelists are Maura Kelly, Director of Mental Health Peer Connection; Todd Varwerk, Director of Public Policy, Western New York Independent Living Incorporated; and Heather Filia, Disabilities Rights Advocate, Independent Living of Niagara County.
Welcome. Today we're going to be talking about a law in New York State, Kendra's Law. It's been on the books for over a decade, and that every so often it comes up for reauthorization, I guess would be the word for it. Do we keep enforcing it or not? And there seems to be some controversy around this particular bill. And Maura, I'd like to start with, can you give us an overview of what Kendra's Law is?
Sure. First of all, people take offense to calling it Kendra's Law. It's also called involuntary outpatient treatment for people with mental illness. In 1999, a man named Andrew Goldstein, who lived in New York City, went to at least 3 psychiatric hospitalizations to get help. And they saw him so much that they refused to get him help. He has schizophrenia and was delusional, and he was in the subway station, and he pushed a woman named Kendra Webdell in front of a subway train, and she was killed immediately. And there was an outcry that something had to be done to help these people with mental illness that are dangerous in New York State. So then Attorney General Eliot Spitzer proposed this law, and they named it after Kendra Webdell, to force people that could not take care of themselves in the community, that had mental illness, that had multiple hospitalizations in psychiatric units, to treatment. So a law was passed, and it was passed for 5 years to be researched and studied to see if this law was effective. And since then, the law has been temporary, and this year they want to make the law permanent because of some few outcries of violence or acts of violence by people with mental illness in New York State.
Yeah, but Todd, doesn't that sort of underscore a contradiction or something, that we're talking about an individual who was refused treatment?
Absolutely. If the purpose of the legislature was to make a law to deal with the problem that was actually presented by Kendra Webdell, it'd be to ensure that people with disabilities, people with mental health diagnoses that seek treatment, get treatment. Instead, we went in the entire different direction. We turned around and said, hold on, we're not worried about those people. We're not worried about the strength or the depth of our mental health system. We're worried about those people that don't want treatment. We're going to force them into getting outpatient treatment.
Now, well, the whole aspect of forcing individuals to receive some type of treatment, I mean, who's forcing this, Heather? Do you know, who comes across and suddenly says?
The petitions are made by psychiatrists, licensed clinical social workers, judges, the courts, people who.
But they can be started by anybody. You can outreach to county mental health services. Anybody can start this process.
It even goes worse than that.
The neighbor?
Yes,
Yeah.
a neighbor, a landlord, a parent, a family member.
The librarian that only met you once?
Can go to the county of Department of Mental Health, whatever county you're in, and say, look, I'm concerned about Joe Schmo. I think he needs to be assessed for forced outpatient treatment. And the county has an obligation to look into that and to make an assessment and recommend that this person needs forced treatment or not. And then that recommendation goes to a judge. If the person declines the force, they're admitted to the psychiatric center for evaluation for 3 days. And upon evaluation, they tell the judge, yes, he needs assistance and needs force, or no, he doesn't.
But what is the problem of the fact that, you know, if you're aware that your neighbor has a history of a psychiatric disability, and suddenly you see him doing some bizarre activity, you know, even around the community, and, you know, that creates an unsafe situation for himself or maybe a member of the family or whatever. I mean, what's the problem, Heather, with, picking up the phone and saying, hey, check this guy out?
I think the problem lies in that they can extend the 72 hours at their own discretion as an involuntary admission, therefore forcing this person to maybe his acting out as part of who he is.
But I don't think...
Just because it's bizarre to a neighbor doesn't mean it's bizarre.
You're making the assumption that the neighbor is aware of a mental health diagnosis. The neighbor thinks there might be one and calls. There may or may not actually be one.
But if there isn't one, then the person's not subject to the law.
Well, not necessarily. Okay? If there isn't one, they wouldn't be subject to Kendra's law, but there'd definitely be process involved. One of the problems with something like this is the fact that it can be started by anybody for any reason. It can be started by the neighbor who just doesn't like the guy next door and who might have heard a rumor that at one time they were hospitalized. They call and then we're off to the races. I mean, Kendra's law's got a significant problem because the relief that they seek is forcing treatment that people may or may not want. Let me ask you a question. Do you think that it's right for somebody to be able to come along and say, I don't think he should be in that chair because at one time I saw him walking, so I'm going to force him into physical therapy? Is there a law that says that in New York?
Yeah, but we're not, that's comparing apples to oranges here. We're talking about, as Morris said in the beginning, as a person with a history of a psychiatric disability. And, if that person, and if that person, if you're seeing a person standing at the edge of the outside of the bridge, is looking down at the Niagara River, 150 feet below them, I mean, would you not want to assist in saving that person's life?
It should never get that far. That's the problem. They're blaming people with mental illness, and they're not looking at the mental health system.
Yeah, but
the mental health system is
at this point, from what I hear, is that this is a law that creates the ability for the citizen and people in a position of authority to open up and get people help.
No, I think we're confusing two things here. I think we're confusing the local authorities' power to do a 72-hour hold in the event like of a direct suicide standing over a bridge, okay, which means they go to a hospital, someone evaluates them for 3 days, and then determines if treatment is recommended versus forced outpatient treatment, which means we may not be talking about something that black and white, Doug. We might not be talking about somebody standing on a bridge. We might just be talking about somebody who's talking to himself out in their yard with no cell phone earpiece in their ear. The neighbor or somebody in the community getting annoyed and subjecting that person to evaluation for outpatient treatment, not to judge whether or not they're a danger, but just to judge to remove the item that annoys them in terms of that person's behavior.
And
we're going to have to take a break here, and when we get back, we'll explore maybe some of the benefits and the drawbacks of the law itself. So we'll be here when you return.
Today, people with disabilities are participating fully in the social and economic life of New York State. In large measure, this is true because of the work of an independent living center in your community. The New York State Independent Living Council is dedicated to promoting the independent living philosophy and to facilitating access to independent living services. For more information on the council or about your nearest independent living center, call toll-free 1-888-469-7452.
Are you looking for new ideas to help you sell? Need a presentation that must compel? Have a message you wish to dispel? Or an important story you need to tell? Are you exploring new ways to communicate, to motivate, to educate, or demonstrate? Or are you searching for creative concepts to help you entertain, promote your brand name, to effectively train, or launch a new web domain name? Then focus on Creative Concept Studios and see the possibilities.
Welcome back. We're talking about a law that actually can, I guess, secure individuals with psychiatric disabilities based on person's belief that they're acting unsafely. So, Maura, you wanted to get back to the question of an individual standing on the bridge over the Niagara River, not to be confused with the guy that being paid hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars to walk over the Niagara Gorge.
This law has nothing to do with the imminent danger of someone attempting suicide or harming others. This law has to do with someone not in imminent danger, but unable to take care of themselves, deemed unable to take care of themselves in the community. So the person standing on the bridge would definitely get immediate help and immediate response. This is for people that aren't standing on the bridge, that are just going about their lives and may act strangely in our opinion, but not in their opinion.
Well, who does the deeming?
The neighbors, the family, the county Department of Mental Health, the courts.
Well, if this law permits neighbor spying and reporting neighbors that do bizarre things, and hopefully they never look in my backyard, then what's the benefits of this particular law?
I haven't seen any. I haven't seen any benefits.
Well, and I think that it's important to note that the reason why they originally gave it a sunset, as Maura had said, was that they were going to study how effective this sort of system was in dealing with people in mental health crises. We're now looking at, the third or the fourth reauthorization.
Right, but the law is effective in the fact that people that are forced get community services. They get a lot of assistance. So the study is weighing whether it's the community supports that helps these people or is it the force that helps these people. And they can't distinguish which helps them. And my argument is it's the community supports that help them.
Yeah, but does it take 12 years to get definitive results on a state study?
Right.
I mean, that was my point before.
You mean there hasn't been any
right.
results at all? Nothing's been published during the decade plus.
It's been published, but it hasn't been, the results are, they can't distinguish what helps.
Yeah.
What helps, the community supports or being forced.
So
I question whether or not it's a help. You know, being forced into something seems like it would stop people from seeking help. You know, like the fear of I'm going to get locked up and never let out. You know, like how many people will ask for help with that hanging over their head?
does this have the potential of perpetuating the stigma of mental illness, or what?
Yes, I think people already don't want anyone to know that they have a mental illness because of internal stigma and external stigma. The idea that if someone has a mental illness is going to be forced into treatment just adds to that stigma, which in my words, stigma means discrimination.
Now, in the earlier segment of the show, I believe it was Todd who said, you know, you can try to invoke Kendra's law just because of some bizarre behavior that you think your neighbor's exhibiting.
Yep.
So this doesn't include the fact that the neighbor has to know there's a mental illness involved at all, just the fact that they're a little put out by what they're seeing. Absolutely.
Because like everything else, once a report is received by the county, they're obligated to outreach and investigate because they don't know whether it's real or whether it isn't. I mean, we already have laws in the books that promote, you know, us spying on our fellow man. The problem with Kendra's law is that it doesn't deal with the problem presented by the person they're naming it after. You really want to solve this problem, you need a strong mental health system so that the persons who do reach out for help, who say, hey, look, I know that there's something wrong, get the help they need. Not walking around looking for people that might need help and forcing them into help.
And this also forces people to be force medicated. If you're in outpatient treatment and they recommend medication, psychotropic medication, and you don't follow that recommendation, you'll be discharged from that treatment because they don't want the liability of someone not following their direction, and the person's in court again because you're not following the treatment. So that means they must take the medication prescribed. And medicating people in America by force just doesn't seem American to me.
Let alone the medication making the symptoms of the mental illness worse, prior to it even being able to gauge whether it's going to be effective or not.
Yeah, but if you're coming in and you provide the medication for somebody that needs it, isn't that a cost-effective situation by getting in there quicker than dealing with what the ramifications may be later?
Hey, they might not want treatment, but they may want treatment, but they might not want medication. There is a significant segment of the population that understands that the side effects may be worse than the original condition.
Right. Robert Whitaker just wrote a book called The Anatomy of an Epidemic that clearly he's done research that states people that don't take medication, that have serious mental illness such as schizophrenia, do better in the long run with recovery than people that do take medication. And the people that do take medication are more likely to be hospitalized more often.
Yeah, but right now in this time in the climate we're in, there's a big economic thing, and people are saying preventive maintenance is better than, retroactive refix. So are we seeing cost benefits over the 12 years of this law being in play?
No. In fact, if the law goes further, there'll be $30 million spent a cost just right off the bat in helping these people, where the Medicaid redesign team that's in New York State now is trying to enhance community supports and community services that are not forced. So and that prevents the co-occurring diseases like diabetes, obesity that occurs when people are on these new psychotropic medications.
There are a lot of things that we're trying to do in this medical climate, Doug, that can have a tremendous benefit for the population of people with disabilities. Being able to centralize specialized treatment in help homes is a really good example of that. But when you're looking at Kendra's law, you're not looking at benefit. You're looking at cost. And I find it really interesting that when the Association of County Medicaid Directors and the consumer groups agree that this hasn't been proven yet and shouldn't be made permanent, that should normally put the subject to rest. I question why it hasn't yet.
Why it hasn't been put to sleep. So somebody's keeping it alive.
Yes.
All right. Well, it's time to take a break right now. When we come back, we'll look at what are some of the other alternatives that persons with psychiatric disabilities can take advantage of in their communities if Kendra law isn't on the books. So we'll see you in about 60 seconds.
Today, people with disabilities are participating fully in the social and economic life of New York State. In large measure, this is true because of the work of an independent living center in your community. The New York State Independent Living Council is dedicated to promoting the independent living philosophy and to facilitating access to independent living services. For more information on the council or about your nearest independent living center, call toll-free 1-888-469-7452.
Are you looking for new ideas to help you sell? Need a presentation that must compel? Have a message you wish to dispel? Or an important story you need to tell? Are you exploring new ways to communicate, to motivate, to educate, or demonstrate? Or are you searching for creative concepts to help you entertain, promote your brand name, to effectively train, or launch a new web domain name? Then focus on Creative Concept Studios and see the possibilities.
Welcome back. We've been talking about Kendra's law and the impact and the fact that most of our panelists here feel that the law isn't needed. So taking that in consideration, that the law isn't needed and that we don't need people to intrude on other individuals' personal activity, Maura, what's out there for people with psychiatric disabilities that they can take advantage of and work through the difficulties of that particular disability?
There's a number of things out there. The first thing I can think of is there's peer services. There's peers that people that have been there, that have walked in their shoes in recovery can share with the person having difficulty in recovery and give them hope. And there's peer counseling, there's psychotherapy, there's support groups, self-help support groups, there's meditation and medication, and there's yoga, relaxation. There's many techniques that don't involve force. There's even cognitive therapy. They're seeing psychiatrists of their choice.
Okay, you're creating quite a laundry list, and I'm not sure if everybody understands all the things that you're throwing out. But Heather, let's sort of look at the peer element of that. What's the benefits of somebody going to a peer-run organization, especially an organization that has employed individuals with psychiatric disabilities?
I'd say learning by example. I feel that, like if I'm talking to somebody who's been, let's say, where I've been, I can practice some of the things that they've done to recover from mental illness, as opposed to being told what I need to do or what I have to do, instead being shown what has helped others.
Yeah, and also kind of being able to see the light at the end of the tunnel other than just imagining it. Peers, they know the tricks of what works and what doesn't work. They can be able to say, well, I tried this medication, this is what happened to me. Okay? Now, that isn't necessarily going to always follow that it's going to happen to the other person, but at least that person's going to know and be able to say, okay, if I experience that, then maybe I should switch to this medication, or maybe I should try relaxation or counseling or whatever alternatives until they find something that works for them.
Well, right, it's by learning from people who suffer from mental illness, as opposed to somebody who's been educated through a book.
Who identified they suffer?
Well, does this clash with the traditional medical psychiatric treatments of the community that we're probably most familiar with?
I think it's an adjunct, and I'd also like to mention Mary Ellen Copeland's RAP plan philosophy.
What's a RAP
a
plan?
Wellness Recovery Action Plan that someone develops themselves and writes down their own coping mechanisms. For instance, I have a psychiatric disability, and my dog helps me a lot because I can't not function because I can't take care of my pet. And that helps me. That's part of my Wellness Recovery Action Plan, is to take care of my dog, to walk my dog, to be responsible, to go to work, to pay for my dog's medical bills. My dog helps me in my recovery, and that's a unique trait that I use for recovery. Everyone has unique ideas and unique exercises they use to stay sane, quote unquote.
Well, I want to get in there and answer that question, because I think, without kind of picking on Heather a little bit, when you're talking about the medical model, you're talking about conditions that must be cured or lifetime illnesses that must be managed. And we don't look at it that way. As a person with a disability, my disability is not there to be cured or managed. Yeah, we have challenges we've got to be able to get through. Maybe you call that management, maybe you don't. But the peer model focuses on the person that you're going to be at the end of that process, not how to eradicate what they think is wrong with you. Instead, they're going to want to promote what's right with you first.
So if the peer model is so good, how come it hasn't been out there and doing its thing?
It is out there. It is out there, and it's been out there since Judy Chamberlain in the 1970s wrote the book On Our Own. And the peer movement is growing and growing, but professionals with letters after their names somehow feel threatened and do not understand why the peer-to-peer relationship works.
Well, the general populace seems to feel more comfortable with things being, with things like that being controlled by people with letters after their names. Instead of working from life experience, they'd rather have somebody that works from book experience. Now, I would definitely want to make sure that there's both kinds if somebody is going to apply a scalpel and attempt to take out my appendix. But when we're talking about the way we think and we process and we perceive the world, we've apparently lost a little bit of that.
Okay, so how does the person with the psychiatric disability, one, become aware that these type of networks exist for them, that they can link into other individuals who are dealing with that, and two, how do they access it? I mean, obviously, if the neighbor is calling in or somebody's calling in, they have some level of concern because of the behavior. How do you get by the fact that that individual may be in crisis, in order to link them to the appropriate services?
The person in crisis would get immediate help. The person acting strangely or not acting the way someone believes they should act in getting help, they can call, they can reach out. I know when I was in the psychiatric hospital several times, the best help I got was from other patients. And the patients help each other, and those relationships form naturally. And that's how it happens out in the community. People with mental illness go to support groups, hear about support groups in the newspaper, hear about the independent living centers in their area, and can reach out to other peers in the community to get the assistance they want or need in dealing with that neighbor or dealing with that family member that doesn't quite understand why someone speaks to themselves or speaks out loud. That is not against the law. That is America, and we have the right to do that.
So individuals that are truly responsible enough, but doesn't that sort of go against the aspect of psychiatric disability?
I think it's a misnomer to characterize recipients as not wanting treatment, never wanting treatment, avoiding treatment. I think a lot of times it could be something as, if I'm in the privacy of my own home, arguing with myself in order to be able to solve a problem, I shouldn't have to be dragged through a legal process where I need representation and protection just because my neighbor doesn't like the noise level.
And on that level, we're going to have to end here, and we thank you for listening. And I suspect it's pretty much united here that Kendra's law, the need to force an individual into treatment isn't necessary, and that there are community supports such as peer supportive services that you can obviously see from your local independent living center or peer recipient groups out there in your neighborhood. So thank you for listening, and we'll catch you on the next show.
Points of View is presented by the New York State Independent Living Council, Incorporated, in cooperation with the Catskills Center for Independence, Fingerlakes Independence Center, Independent Living of Niagara County, and Western New York Independent Living. For the location of the Independent Living Center in your area, call toll-free 1-888-469-7452.